There are some presidential campaigns where the nominee for the political party is usually a foregone conclusion. Still, they might receive token opposition that needs to be acknowledged but rarely taken seriously. Some that come to mind are Bill Bradley taking on Al Gore in 2000, Ronald Reagan challenging Richard Nixon in 1968, and Pat Buchanan's longshot campaign against incumbent President George Bush. Most of these challenges might have shown some cracks in the eventual nominee's campaign, but are usually brushed aside. Of those I mentioned, only Reagan's 1968 campaign even won a state, with Reagan winning his home state of California, most notably because Nixon wasn't on the ballot. Interesting fact, Nixon's home state in 1968 was actually New York and not California. For Hillary Clinton, the former First Lady, U.S. Senator from New York, and former Secretary of State, it looked as if the nomination was hers for the taking with no serious challenge. Her main competition would have been from John Kerry, who replaced Clinton as President Obama's Secretary of State, and Joe Biden, the incumbent vice president. Kerry said that he would not run for president on February 5th, 2014. As for Biden, while not officially saying that he wasn't running until 2016, he never took any serious steps to campaign for the nomination. It looked as if Hillary's nomination was a lock, and in early 2015, she started building her campaign team and traveling to early primary and caucus states. In a USA Today Suffolk poll released on January 27, 2015, Clinton was leading the potential primary field with 51%, with Elizabeth Warren a very distant second at 5%, though Warren had already indicated in December 2014 that she would not seek the presidency. Biden was third with only 4%, with 31% saying that they were undecided. Clinton put her campaign team together and officially announced that she was seeking the presidency through an online video on April 12, 2015. However, even with the prominent Democrats clearing the field for a Hillary Clinton nomination coronation, there were some unsettling issues which raised questions. First was Clinton's use of a private email server used during her time as Secretary of State, which was reported on March 3rd, 2015, just a little over a month before her announcement. There were two main problems with the private email server. The first problem was that having a private server could allow for her official emails to be compromised. The second problem was that because the emails were not on an official government server, that it might be hard for her emails to be archived, which is required by federal law. Another problem was that the foundation that she and her husband founded, the Clinton Foundation, received millions of dollars in contributions from foreign governments while Hillary was still Secretary of State, pushing the idea that foreign governments were essentially bribing Secretary Clinton for access to and favorable treatment from the Obama administration. And before we continue, and considering I'm recording this video in 2026, yes, the absolute irony of what Clinton was accused of is absolutely not lost on me. But let's continue. Another issue that haunted Clinton was the attack on the American consulate in the Libyan town of Benghazi, claiming that during her time as Secretary of State, the State Department didn't provide adequate protection to the consulate, which resulted in the deaths of 4 Americans, including Ambassador Chris Stevens. The Republicans dragged this out through the primaries, which we will talk about later. House Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy basically admitted that the Select Committee on Benghazi was a witch hunt to hurt Clinton politically by saying, quote, "Everybody thought Hillary Clinton was unbeatable, right? But we put together a Benghazi special committee, a select committee. What are her numbers today? Her numbers are dropping. Why? Because she's untrustable. But no one would have known any of that had happened had we not fought and made that happen." End quote. And yes, untrustable is not a word. And while these were issues that could hurt Clinton with all voters, there were other issues that made Democratic voters, particularly progressive voters, uncomfortable with Hillary's candidacy. First was her hawkish view on foreign policy. In 2002, she voted to authorize the Iraq War, but also supported more interventionist policies like the American government being involved with the Arab Spring. She was also seen as being close to big business interests and Wall Street. For years, both Clintons were seen as being very close to Wall Street, especially since Bill Clinton signed the law that repealed the Glass-Steagall Act, which was a major contributing factor to the 2008 financial crisis. And during the time between her leaving as Secretary of State and her announcing her candidacy, she was known to have given paid speeches to companies such as Goldman Sachs. 1 month after her online announcement, her campaign gave a financial disclosure in which it stated that the Clintons had received $25 million for just over 100 speaking engagements since January of 2014. This made those who were uncomfortable with her candidacy to seek an alternative. One person who teased the fact that he might be running for president was Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders. Sanders first made his intentions known in November of 2013 when visiting Philadelphia, Mississippi, the place where Ronald Reagan made his first campaign stop immediately after winning the Republican nomination in 1980. While visiting, the Burlington Free Press reported that Sanders was willing to consider making a run. Sanders told the Free Press, quote, "Under normal times, it's fine. You have a moderate Democrat running, a moderate Republican running. But these are not normal times. The United States right now is in the middle of a severe crisis, and you have to call it what it is," end quote. The Free Press even reported that Sanders would probably run as an independent, though they even put the word probably in quotes. Sanders said that the problem with being an independent was that it would be hard to be in any televised debates. However, early indications were that if Elizabeth Warren were a candidate for president, then Sanders would support Warren for the Democratic nomination. But what would eventually become the Bernie Sanders phenomenon didn't simply come from a vacuum, because Sanders was an independent, as well as what he describes as a democratic socialist, though I would argue a social democrat, which is not simply semantic. He was able to build a nationwide network of donors that supported social democratic causes, such as universal health care. During his time as mayor, congressman, and senator, Sanders established a nationwide network of 700,000 donors, according to the Burlington Free Press. But with each passing day, it seemed less likely that Elizabeth Warren was going to run for president. She wasn't actively going to Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada, or South Carolina, only going to those states when certain events were held in those states, like MoveOn.org's event on December 17th, 2014 in Des Moines, Iowa. But a few years after the election, Bernie's campaign manager, Jeff Weaver, said that Bernie had encouraged Warren to run for president and essentially deferred his decision. And when it became evident that Warren wouldn't run, Sanders started visiting Iowa and New Hampshire in May of 2014, still a good 7 months before Warren announced that she wasn't running for president. These early visits told us two things. First, it was highly likely that Sanders' campaign knew, or were fairly confident, that Warren wasn't going to run, thus started making the moves for his own run. But the second thing that these visits gave away was that he was probably going to run as a Democratic candidate for president. I mean, if he was going to run as an independent, why would he visit the two most important primary states? With that, Sanders entered the presidential race on April 30th, 2015 at the Capitol building in Washington, using the typical progressive speech that we have all become accustomed to over the years. In a tweet, Hillary Clinton said, quote, "I agree with Bernie. Focus must be on helping America's middle class. GOP would hold them back. I welcome him to the race." When Sanders made his announcement, there were two other candidates rumored to be entering the race. First was former governor of Maryland, Martin O'Malley, who made Bill Clinton's support for the repeal of Glass-Steagall a cornerstone of his campaign. But he also knew that Hispanic voters, who were a growing group within the Democratic Party, were not necessarily totally behind any candidates. O'Malley made his announcement on May 30th, 2015. The other potential candidate was Jim Webb, former Secretary of the Navy and Senator from Virginia, who entered the race because he felt that the Democratic Party had shifted too far to the left, especially on social issues. Webb announced on July 2nd, 2015. Still, Hillary Clinton was considered the frontrunner, with none of these three posing a significant challenge. Before any potential candidates announced their candidacy, Dana Milbank of the Washington Post wrote, quote, "It's Clinton and nobody, unless you think Martin O'Malley or Jim Webb or Bernie Sanders can make a serious run for the Democratic nomination, in which case you probably also believe in the tooth fairy," end quote. Even before the candidates announced their intentions, the Democratic National Committee had been in contact with each candidate to discuss the rules and procedure for debates. The Sanders, O'Malley, and Webb campaigns had publicly stated that they wanted to have as many debates as possible as early as possible. But for the Clinton campaign, they wanted the opposite. In an April 27th email from Charlie Baker, the chief administrative officer for the Clinton campaign, to John Podesta, the chair of the Clinton campaign, Robbie Mook, Clinton's campaign manager, Ron Klain, senior advisor to Hillary Clinton, and Jen Palmieri, Clinton's director of communications, Baker said, quote, "Through internal discussions, we concluded that it was in our interest to 1. Limit the number of debates and the number in each state, 2. To start the debates as late as possible, 3. Keep debates out of the busy window between February 1st and February 27th, 2016, Iowa and South Carolina, 4. Create a schedule that would allow the later debates to be canceled if the race is for practical purposes over, 5. Encourage an emphasis on local issues and local media participants in the debate formats, and 6. Ensure a format that provides equal time for all candidates and does not give the moderator any discretion to focus on one candidate." Through discussions of these goals with the DNC, their current plan is to begin a debate schedule that would commence in early October, with one debate a month, one each in early primary and caucus states, and the remaining 2 post South Carolina. We will need to push them post March 1st, and then the later 2 debates would be canceled if the race ends. The DNC's current plan is to release the attached press release, which lacks the specificity but confirms the number and start window for the debates. The other campaigns have advocated, not surprisingly, for more debates and for the schedule to start significantly earlier. Mo and Anita believe that this announcement prior to the actual entry into the race of other candidates will strengthen their hand as they lock a schedule in with local media partners and state parties. One remaining issue is the criteria for participation. We believe it is important to extend possible to keep the debates multi-candidate and to eliminate the possibility of one-on-one debates. The most likely standard that would achieve this result is to allow any announced candidate who is 1. A Democrat, and 2. Who meets some threshold viability, 1%, in either a national or state-specific poll, example, Iowa, New Hampshire, to participate, end quote. This email is very important for a few reasons. First, the email was also sent to Ron Klain, who was Joe Biden's former chief of staff, and mentioned Anita Dunn, a Democratic consultant who was also close to Joe Biden. The fact is that people who would have been highly involved with a potential Biden presidential run were in the loop when it came to the Clinton campaign, often connected with the most senior of Clinton campaign officials. This is a good indication that the Clinton campaign probably knew as early as April 2015 that Biden didn't intend to run for president. The second reason that this email is important is that the Democratic National Committee, or the DNC, as I will call them from this point on, essentially allowed the Clinton campaign to dictate the debate rules. 8 days later, DNC chairwoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz announced the debate rules, which followed all the criteria that the Clinton campaign had asked for. Even though the DNC said that the debates would be scheduled in the fall of 2015, they eventually scheduled the first debate on October 13th, exactly the month that the Clinton campaign had asked for. Another important thing in this email is the quote, Mo and Anita believe that this announcement prior to the actual entry into the race of other candidates will strengthen their hand as they lock a schedule in with local media partners and state parties. The Mo that is mentioned in this email is Mo Elothy, the communications director for the DNC. This line itself shows that the DNC was advising the Clinton campaign directly before the primaries. One other criterion that the DNC had already laid out before this email was that no candidate could participate in debates outside of those sanctioned by the DNC, or they would not be allowed to participate in future DNC sanctioned debates. This really squeezed the smaller campaigns to limit their abilities to get public exposure. Now, before we continue, I know that some people might not like the fact that I'm using the leaked Podesta and DNC emails in this video. And while you might not like the way in which they were obtained, and I completely sympathize with you, they are historical documents that give us an idea of the inner workings of the Clinton campaign and the DNC. Of course, I can't do this with the other campaigns as their emails were never leaked. But these email documents are absolutely historically significant, and documenting this election without this information, I think, sugarcoats the dynamics of the election. Even though the Sanders campaign had disagreed with the debates, they had already been moving toward building a strong grassroots campaign. Less than 2 weeks after he made his intentions known on Capitol Hill, on May 10th, Sanders went on NBC's Meet the Press to talk about his candidacy. In the interview, he said that he felt like he could beat Hillary Clinton and that his website had already received 200,000 signups as well as 90,000 contributions, averaging $43. Emails within the Clinton campaign indicated that the campaign was monitoring the situation, but nothing more. Sanders officially launched his campaign in Burlington, Vermont, 16 days later on May 26th. 4 days later, Martin O'Malley launched his campaign. Another candidate to launch his campaign on June 3rd, who hadn't been mentioned earlier, was Lincoln Chafee, the former governor and senator from Rhode Island. Chafee was a former Republican who then became an independent, with this being his first campaign as a Democrat. Chafee's campaign was focused on ending the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, with his 10 points for prosperity through peace focusing on an isolationist approach to foreign policy. Also, he had an obsession with the metric system. Not saying that he was wrong, but it was a cornerstone of his campaign. After Sanders made his announcement to run, Ann Seltzer, the highly respected pollster from Iowa, who would eventually have her reputation destroyed in 2024, conducted a poll of potential Iowa Democratic caucus goers. In the poll, Hillary Clinton was dominating with 57% of respondents saying that they would pick Hillary, with Sanders receiving 16% support. Still, in a poll released in February, Sanders was only polling at 5% with Clinton at 56%. With the Run, Warren, Run draft effort ending in late May and Warren not being included in the most recent Iowa poll, it seemed as if a large chunk of Warren supporters who polled at 16% in the February poll were shifting to Sanders. On June 13th, Clinton made her official campaign launch on Roosevelt Island, with the idea behind the venue choice being that Clinton would be a champion of the values and ideals of former President Franklin D. Roosevelt. During her announcement, she used much of the messaging that Sanders had used, trying to label herself as a pragmatic progressive that would move the country forward, but do it in a pragmatic way. Overall, the press coverage of her speech was positive, with many comparing this speech to FDR's Four Freedoms, which was the name of the venue she was at, which included freedom of speech and expression, freedom of worship, freedom from want, and freedom from fear, which was exactly what the campaign wanted. Even though Clinton was considered to be far ahead, there were two things that the campaign worried about. First was that Sanders was receiving large crowds at his events compared to Clinton's events. Second, MSNBC was giving Sanders' campaign more coverage than they thought that it deserved. The first indications that these might be legitimate worries were two polls coming out of New Hampshire. The first poll, conducted by Suffolk University, found Clinton with 41% support in the state to Sanders' 31% support. A few days later, a CNN WMUR poll conducted by the University of New Hampshire found that Clinton was polling at 43% among likely Democratic primary voters, with Sanders not far behind at 35%. While these numbers somewhat worried the Clinton campaign, stating that these polls showed that Sanders was indeed gaining in New Hampshire, they were still more focused on the general election, with the campaign considering former Florida Governor Jeb Bush, Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker, Kentucky Senator Rand Paul, and current U.S. Senator from Florida Marco Rubio being the likely candidates to take on Hillary in the general election. Still, Clinton surrogates like Senator Claire McCaskill, who endorsed Hillary way back in June of 2013, attacked Sanders for being too liberal to win a general election. Throughout the campaign, McCaskill attacked Sanders, constantly saying that the Republicans would use a hammer and sickle in ads about Sanders if he were to win the nomination. Now, before we continue, if you like this video so far, please press the like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. If you would like to support the channel further, you can click on the super chat button below and provide a one-time donation, or you can become a member of my Patreon, where I will be uploading some more Patreon members only videos in the future. Thanks to all my current Patreon members that make this channel possible. Now, back to the video. The momentum wasn't stopping for Bernie Sanders. On July 1st, Sanders held a rally at the Veterans Memorial Coliseum in Madison, Wisconsin, with a crowd of nearly 10,000 supporters, something that none of the campaigns in either political party had seen to this point. To put it in perspective, Clinton's campaign announcement at Four Freedoms Park on Roosevelt Island, which was in the largest city in the nation, was estimated to only have 5,500 attendees. This attendance in a non-early primary state, along with recent polling boost in Iowa and New Hampshire, moved Sanders from being a fringe candidate to one being taken more seriously. Just to compare, a June 16, 2007 Mason-Dixon poll found Barack Obama with only 18% support in Iowa, with Obama being 9% behind Clinton in New Hampshire in the same CNN WMUR poll conducted by the University of New Hampshire. Therefore, there was a precedent for now treating Sanders as a serious contender for the nomination. Even early in the campaign, certain groups of voters were gravitating over to their respective camps. As for Clinton, she had strong connection with black voters, somewhat struggled with Hispanic voters, but very strong with white, moderate, and older voters, especially female voters who focused on having the first female president. As for the Sanders campaign, his campaign was popular amongst younger voters, especially white younger voters, but also won over some older white male voters. He was performing well with Hispanic voters and increasing with each and every poll, but still performed poorly with black voters. This was to come to a head at the Progressive Netroots Conference in Phoenix, Arizona on July 18th. At that conference, Black Lives Matter protesters interrupted the questioning of both Martin O'Malley and Bernie Sanders, asking questions themselves, with BLM supporters afterwards saying that their answers were not satisfactory. Hillary Clinton was not at the Netroots event and thus did not endure the criticism from BLM protesters. But a month later, on August 11th in New Hampshire, Clinton was also confronted by BLM protesters, though not in as public of a forum as Sanders or O'Malley. Still, the questioning of Clinton was caught on a cell phone recording with, again, BLM supporters not considering her answers satisfactory. They criticized her for supporting Bill Clinton's 1994 crime bill, a bill that Bernie Sanders had also voted for during his time in the House of Representatives. So yes, all sides received criticism from the Black Lives Matter movement. On August 6th, the DNC released the debate locations and dates for four of the sanctioned debates. The first was on October 13th in Nevada. The second was on November 14th in Des Moines, with the third being on December 19th in Manchester, New Hampshire. The final known scheduled debate was on January 17th in Charleston, South Carolina. The fifth debate didn't have a specific date yet, but was to be held in Miami, with the sixth debate, also without a definitive date, happening in Wisconsin. Not only did the debate schedule give the Clinton campaign exactly what they wanted — remember, they wanted the first debate to be held in October with other campaigns asking for earlier debates — but it also allowed all of the rules that the Clinton campaign had outlined in the email that I mentioned earlier. Sanders said that he was disappointed by the schedule, but not surprised at all, and would push for more debates. Martin O'Malley's campaign even went further, saying that the DNC was trying to facilitate a coronation. But it wasn't just the debate schedule that favored Clinton. Time magazine reported on August 27th that the Clinton campaign and the DNC negotiated to create the Hillary Victory Fund, a joint fundraising committee that allowed campaigns to raise more money than they could legally do through their campaign, bypassing the $2,700 individual contribution limits for primary and general election contributions. But this was not uncommon, as the Sanders campaign would also set up their own joint effort called the Bernie Victory Fund. So we know why they existed, but how did they work? Well, let's say a large donor wants to give $1 million to the Clinton campaign. Remember, that donor could only give $2,700 as an individual. In this case, the donor would give the Hillary Victory Fund the $1 million check. The fund would then disperse the money to three different entities. The first was the Clinton campaign itself, which was only a fraction of the money that came in. The second entity was the DNC itself. The third entity was state parties. But one of the issues that was reported in Time magazine was that the money that the state parties usually received went right back into the DNC. That wasn't illegal at all, but it did consolidate money within the DNC. Still, the idea of these victory funds was that whoever won the nomination, that all of the money collected by the DNC with these political funds would be used in the general election. So, what were the main problems with it beside the optics? First, the Clinton campaign had come to this agreement with the DNC quite early. In 2008, Barack Obama didn't set up his victory fund until March of 2008, just a few months before the convention, when it was apparent that either he or Hillary would be the nominee. The second problem was that the DNC actually made another agreement with Hillary's campaign, called a Memorandum of Understanding, which would give the Clinton campaign influence when it came to DNC messaging, staff, finances, strategies, and so on, as well as giving the Clinton campaign the right of refusal on these decisions made by the DNC. Sanders' agreement did not have this stipulation. The events around the time of the Hillary Victory Fund being established were rough for her campaign. 3 days before, a new NBC News Marist poll showed Bernie Sanders leading in New Hampshire with 41% support to Clinton's 32% support. The next day, Clinton apologized for the private email server for her correspondence as Secretary of State. The next day, a Quinnipiac poll of potential Iowa caucus goers found Bernie Sanders was now in the lead in that state with 41% support, with Hillary Clinton at 40% support. Joe Biden was still being polled and was at 12%, significantly behind the other two. In a national poll released by NBC News and the Wall Street Journal, Hillary was leading with 42% of national support to Bernie's 35%. Even though Clinton was leading, this was the first time that we saw Sanders within the margin of error of Clinton in a national poll. And to add insult to injury, a protest was held outside of the DNC headquarters demanding more debates. Both Sanders and O'Malley's campaigns presented more than 20,000 petitions of their supporters demanding more debates, as well as allowing candidates to participate in non-sanctioned debates. As the polls indicated, voters were starting to shift away from Hillary and toward Bernie, with many of the contemporaneous opinion pieces at the time saying that Clinton was starting to lose the trust of the voters. Yes, all of the problems that her campaign faced that I mentioned at the beginning of this video, like the email server, the Clinton Foundation, and so on, were piling up. But with Bernie Sanders implying that the system was rigged and Martin O'Malley directly coming out and saying that the DNC was trying to hand Hillary Clinton the nomination, her numbers were dropping. And with all of the news about the debate schedule and the Victory Fund coordination, supporters of Sanders and O'Malley were very much hinting that the DNC wasn't just playing favorites, but actually coordinating to get Hillary the nomination. And they were right to be suspicious. Bill de Blasio, at that time the mayor of New York City, created a 501c4 group called the Progressive Agenda Committee, which was a somewhat progressive organization that mostly advocated for taxing billionaires and supporting an increase in the minimum wage. On September 18th, Sanders requested to meet with de Blasio. And while de Blasio accepted, he immediately sent an email to both John Podesta and Rob Mook saying that he had accepted the meeting. In the email, which was sent before the meeting with Sanders, de Blasio said that he would say that he would like to work with Sanders, but that he wouldn't be supporting his campaign. He goes further to talk about the upcoming Progressive Agenda Forum in Iowa, saying that he was going to invite Sanders during their meeting, but also told Podesta and Mook, quote, "But I quietly first want to see what dates work for you guys before locking anything down," end quote. Finally, he tells the two men that he would be going on ABC's This Week program, telling the two that he would be praising Hillary. A little over a month later, on October 30th, de Blasio endorsed Hillary Clinton. On October 13th, the first Democratic debate was held. Overall, it was pretty tame, but was probably known mostly for this quote.
And that is that the American people are sick and tired of hearing about your damn emails.
Thank you. Me too. Me too.
You know? The middle class, Anderson, and let me say something about the media as well. I go around the country, talk to a whole lot of people. Middle class of this country is collapsing. We have 27 million people living in poverty. We have massive wealth and income inequality. Our trade policies have cost us millions of decent jobs. The American people want to know whether we're going to have a democracy or an oligarchy as a result of Citizens United. Enough of the emails. Let's talk about the real issues facing America.
Thank you, Bernie. Thank you.
A CNN poll was conducted after the debate, which showed that 62% of Democrats polled thought that Hillary was the winner of the debate, with 35% saying that Sanders was the winner. Still, the same poll showed that Hillary's favorability rating had been dropping, now at 44% compared to 63% a year earlier. With a 52% unfavorable rating, this put Clinton 8% underwater. Sanders, on the other hand, had a 43% favorable rating with 30% unfavorable, 13% above water, and voters were still getting to know him. On October 17th, a new term came into the political lexicon. The Bernie Bro was coined by Robinson Meyer in an Atlantic magazine article. It described a type of young, mostly male, very online Sanders supporter who Meyer portrayed as aggressive, self-righteous, and dismissive of Clinton supporters. What's important regarding this narrative is that young female voters were much more likely to be Sanders voters than Hillary voters. Also, black men were very much more likely to be Hillary voters than Bernie supporters. Thus, both of these narratives disprove that Bernie support was primarily from angry white men, but the Clinton campaign clung to this narrative throughout the campaign. On the same day that the Bernie Bro term was coined, a new poll by the Boston Globe came out from New Hampshire showing that Sanders was 2% behind Clinton, 37% to 35%, despite the fact that 54% of those polled in New Hampshire thought that Hillary had won the first debate, compared to only 24% for Sanders. When asked about the trustworthiness of the candidates, Sanders topped the poll at 33%, with Joe Biden at 23% and Clinton at 22%. And yes, Biden was still being mentioned because he hadn't officially announced whether he would run for president or not. When New Hampshire voters were asked about Biden's potential entry into the race, only 36% said that they wanted Biden to enter the race, with 50% saying that they didn't want him to do so. But one person who was out was Jim Webb. On the same day that Justin Trudeau became Prime Minister of Canada, Jim Webb announced that he was dropping out of the presidential race. Webb's announcement was first reported on Fox News and said that his views were no longer in line with the mainstream Democratic Party, considering an independent run for the presidency. On March 4, 2016, Webb said that he would not vote for Hillary Clinton and would consider voting for Donald Trump. On February 11, 2016, Webb ruled out an independent run. Honestly, nobody really cared if Webb was out of the race, but many people were wondering if Vice President Joe Biden was going to jump in. Biden answered that question 1 week later by saying that he was not going to be a candidate for the Democratic nomination. His reason was that there wasn't enough time to mount an effective campaign for the nomination. Instead, he finished out his term as vice president. During the campaign, it has to be said that Biden was fair to both Hillary and Bernie. Most people expected Biden to back Clinton since she was formerly part of the Obama White House and a Democratic establishment candidate. But to the surprise of many, he had very positive things to say about Sanders throughout the campaign. But besides that, he wouldn't tilt the scales in favor of any candidates and stayed quiet throughout the rest of the Democratic primaries. One day after Biden announced that he wasn't going to run for president, Hillary Clinton testified in front of Congress regarding the attack on Benghazi. During her 11-hour testimony, which looked more like a show trial than an actual fact-finding commission, Clinton looked even stronger than when she came in. The Republicans tried to bait her into answering questions that really didn't have any clear answers or delved into conservative conspiracy theories, but she didn't take the bait. According to a Wall Street Journal NBC poll after the testimony, 72% of Democratic voters were satisfied with Clinton's responses to the questions, which also helped her in the national Democratic primary polls, leading with 62% to Bernie Sanders' 31%. The day after Clinton testified, Lincoln Chafee dropped out of the race. But not all was well at the DNC. On October 15th, R.T. Rayback, former mayor of Minneapolis and vice chairman of the DNC, said that DNC chairwoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz made false statements about a number of issues within DNC, as well as the debate schedule and the number of debates, even telling the New York Times that he questioned her ability to lead the party. Another person who publicly suggested that there should be more debates was Tulsi Gabbard, congresswoman from Hawaii and another DNC vice chair. Because Gabbard suggested that there should be more debates, the DNC told her that she had been disinvited from the first debate. However, the DNC denied that Gabbard was ever uninvited in the first place. In November, things started getting worse for Wasserman Schultz. Before she had scheduled the debates, Wasserman Schultz claimed that she had contacted 4 former DNC chairs to consult with them about the primary schedule. Time magazine contacted the 4 former chairs, with 3 of them, former Vermont Governor Howard Dean, former Pennsylvania Governor Ed Rendell, and Don Fowler, who was the DNC chair in the mid-1990s, saying that Wasserman Schultz never consulted them. Dean said, quote, "She didn't consult me," end quote. Rendell said that he did not consult with her, but he did talk to her in late October. Don Fowler said, quote, "No, she didn't talk to me at all," end quote. The 4th former chair, Terry McAuliffe, did not respond to Time, which is not a shock since he owes his political career to the Clinton family. On November 14, 2015, the second Democratic debate was held in Des Moines, Iowa. The focus of this debate was on foreign policy, with the terrorist attacks in Paris, mostly known for the storming of the Bataclan Theater, happened the day before. Of course, how to deal with ISIS was front and center of this debate, but also was the issue of commander in chief readiness. Clinton always argued that she would be the best candidate to deal with international situations, especially crises like a terrorist attack. As for Bernie, he wasn't as focused on foreign policy, but did go after Clinton for her vote on the Iraq War. Sanders mostly stuck with his message about economic progressivism and Clinton's connections to Wall Street. O'Malley also attacked Clinton on her connections with Wall Street, as well as focusing on the Republican frontrunner Donald Trump. In the end, according to a CBS poll, 51% of respondents said that Clinton won the debate, compared to 28% for Sanders and 7% for O'Malley. And even though this debate was more foreign policy focused, it provided stronger contrasts and messages, with Hillary mostly sticking with foreign policy messages and Sanders going with economic progressivism. With two good performances in debates, the polls started indicating that Sanders' momentum started to slow, and Hillary was dominating the polls yet again, especially since Biden was not being included anymore. In an ABC News Washington Post poll conducted on December 1st through the 13th, Hillary was now in the lead with 59% support to Sanders' 28% and O'Malley at 5%. But on December 16th, the rivalry between the two Democratic frontrunners was about to turn red hot. A software problem in the DNC's voter database system, run by vendor NGP Van, briefly broke firewall separation campaign data. That allowed Sanders' campaign staffers to view or access voter data belonging to the Clinton campaign. Jeff Weaver, Sanders' campaign manager, had informed the DNC 2 months earlier that there had been issues with the firewall. So both the DNC and NGP Van were aware of the issues months before the problem on December 16th. The next day, the DNC accused Sanders' campaign of improperly accessing confidential Clinton voter information. Jeff Weaver acknowledged that at least one staffer had viewed the information, but blamed the breach on DNC vendors' software failures. The Sanders campaign fired its national data director, Josh Uretsky, over the incident. We'll get back to him later. Even with this being the case, the next day the DNC cut off the Sanders campaign access to NGP Van, meaning that the campaign couldn't access even their own voter information. No action was taken against the Clinton or O'Malley campaigns. Debbie Wasserman Schultz later published a statement saying that the breach lasted 45 minutes and should not be considered a hack, and that Sanders' access to the voter file would be suspended until a full account of the breach. They further stated that this was not a punishment but a precaution to figure out what happened. But the Sanders campaign didn't buy it and filed a lawsuit in federal court. They filed a suit in the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia against the DNC, alleging breach of contract over the suspension of access to the voter database. The campaign also said that it would seek injunctive relief. The campaign's press release described the suit as a response to the DNC's decision to suspend the access to crucial voter data. The lawsuit claimed that the DNC's suspension was causing them massive harm, estimating the suspension was costing the Sanders campaign $600,000 per day and other campaign damages. But the Clinton campaign argued that Sanders' staff had improperly accessed crucial Clinton campaign data. Clinton's campaign manager, Robbie Mook, demanded a full accounting and assurance that the data had not been used. The Guardian reported that the Clinton campaign described the episodes as Sanders officials' theft of data. Internal emails within the campaign also thought that there should be disciplinary action against the Sanders campaign and that he should publicly apologize for the data breach. However, from the emails that I have read, it doesn't seem like the Clinton campaign had any intention of pointing blame at either the DNC or NGP Van. Before the emergency injunction hearing, the DNC agreed to restore the Sanders campaign's access to the voter file. The Sanders campaign said that the DNC had capitulated, while the DNC said that access was restored only after Sanders' campaign provided the information the DNC requested about the breach. The legal crisis was largely diffused within about a day, but the episode intensified Sanders' supporters and suspicion of Debbie Wasserman Schultz and the DNC. But this issue wasn't going away, with Clinton and the DNC seeming to take more of the blame after Sanders' access was cut. A National Nurses Union statement condemned the DNC's decision to block Sanders' access to the voter file. The statement called it, quote, "the latest blatant effort by the DNC to rig the primary process," end quote. And it tied the data file punishment to the debate schedule and earlier Clinton superdelegate endorsements. It also said the Clinton camp had lobbied the DNC earlier for a lower exposure debate schedule. So yes, NGP Van caused the problem. And yes, the DNC was fully aware of the issues with the firewall protection 2 months prior, according to Jeff Weaver. But was the Sanders campaign totally clean? Yes and no. Remember Bernie's national data director, Josh Uretsky? Well, he or someone within Bernie's data department were found to have conducted 25 searches of 11 states, exporting a statistical summary of New Hampshire. Had the Sanders campaign not exported anything from the Clinton data, then they might not have had their access restricted. But they did, with the DNC, not the Sanders campaign, taking the heat. Overall, the incident lasted only 3 days, but would have a lasting impact on the campaign. The day after the voter file hoopla, the third debate was held in Manchester, New Hampshire, 6 days before Christmas on a Saturday night. This became the clearest example for Sanders supporters who argued the DNC scheduled debates with low viewership. Jeff Weaver even joked that Christmas Eve must have been booked. In this debate, Bernie did apologize for any problems that might have arisen from the voter file situation. Still, the viewership for this debate was 7.85 million, making it the least watched debate of the 3 held so far. In fact, I can't even find post-debate polling from reputable firms. It was probably the strongest debate for Sanders, with many in the media demanding more debates and now openly wondering if the debate schedule was actually tilted in Clinton's favor. At the end of 2015, Clinton had reestablished herself as the frontrunner in the campaign. Bernie was doing well in the polls in the early primary states, making it look even more certain that he was going to win New Hampshire. But in the end, Clinton was still in the driver's seat, and this is how we end 2015. Even though the polls showed Clinton was doing well nationally, a Quinnipiac poll from Iowa, released on January 12, 2016, showed that Sanders was now in the lead in that state with 49% support compared to 44% for Clinton. Now Bernie looked as if he could take the first 2 contests, giving him a huge boost. But early wins don't necessarily mean victory. Ask Bill Clinton, who lost both Iowa and New Hampshire in 1992, just to go on and dominate the nomination process. The 4th debate was held in Charleston, South Carolina, which was hosted by the Congressional Black Caucus Institute, which was 15 days before the Iowa caucuses. The attacks in this debate clearly showed the differences between the 2 candidates. Clinton went after Sanders when it came to gun control, criticizing Sanders for voting against the Brady Bill, a gun control bill which required a national background check for guns, as well as a 5-day waiting period to purchase a firearm. As for Sanders, he introduced his Medicare for All program to the voters, with Clinton defending the Affordable Care Act. Sanders also continued to attack Clinton on her speaking fees from Wall Street, particularly Goldman Sachs. It was purely shaping into a social versus economic race, with economic progressives gravitating to Bernie and those who prioritize social issues gravitating to Hillary. This debate actually had 2 unintended consequences. First, pressure was being put on the DNC and Debbie Wasserman Schultz for the limited number of debates, as well as the debates being held during times of low viewership. It wasn't only Rayback and Gabbard who were complaining about it anymore. Other progressive organizations connected to the Democratic Party, such as Roots Action and Credo Action, circulated petitions asking for Wasserman Schultz to step down as DNC chair. They also criticized the DNC's handling of the voter file data breach. Over the coming weeks, more voices would ask for Wasserman Schultz to step down. To alleviate the pressure, the DNC sanctioned another set of debates since it was now indefensible to stop debates, especially if there was a close race. The second issue was the culinary union in Nevada. The Clinton campaign had been expecting to underperform in Iowa and New Hampshire and were wondering how they could do better in later primary and caucus states, with Nevada being held after New Hampshire. One of the strengths that unions had was that they were able to offer their members good healthcare packages. Sanders's Medicare for All proposal would take one of those arrows out of their quiver. Therefore, unions that had considered supporting Sanders up until that point, like the Culinary Union in Nevada, were now considering either supporting Clinton or just staying out of the process altogether, considering that many in their membership supported Sanders and he was on the rise. The Culinary Union didn't endorse anyone in 2016. The same can't be said in 2020, which was an absolute shit show on their part. The final poll in Iowa, conducted January 26th to the 29th, showed Clinton with 45% support to Sanders's 42% and O'Malley at only 3%. Since the poll was within the 4% margin of error, it was a statistical tie. Also, since O'Malley might not meet the delegate threshold in the caucuses, his supporters might determine who would win the Democratic contest in Iowa. The Iowa caucuses on February 1st were extremely close, with Clinton winning 49.84% of county delegates to Sanders's 49.58%, which was the closest Iowa caucus in history. Well, at least until the 2020 caucus. This proved that not only Bernie could compete against Hillary, but he could compete in the heart of the Midwest. O'Malley dropped out of the race, making this a pure two-person race, something that the Clinton campaign had been wanting to avoid. But some were wondering if Clinton won the caucuses purely by luck. The next day, reports emerged that several Iowa precincts used coin tosses to award tied state delegates. Time reported that at least 5 coin tosses were used and that Clinton won each one of those reported tosses. The Atlantic also reported that more than a dozen delegates were awarded through coin flips in an extremely close contest. Considering that Clinton only won by 3 more delegates to the state convention than Sanders, these coin flips absolutely had an impact as to who the perceived winner was. The first primary state was New Hampshire, where Sanders had been leading in the polls. In 2008, Hillary Clinton won New Hampshire, but it wasn't looking good this time. On February 3rd, in Derry, New Hampshire, Clinton was asked about her paid speeches at a CNN town hall by moderator Anderson Cooper. Cooper asked her if she had made a mistake by giving those speeches, with Clinton saying no and that she had made a lot of speeches in the past and simply answered questions. When asked why she accepted $675,000 for the speeches, she answered, quote, "Well, I don't know, that's what they offered," end quote. The February 4th New Hampshire debate was basically the same as the other debates. However, Clinton's answer at the town hall a day earlier was haunting her in this debate. Sanders asked Clinton to release the transcripts of the speeches that she gave to Goldman Sachs, but Clinton said that she would refuse to do so. With Clinton being hammered on her Wall Street connections and Bernie also promoting his Medicare for All program, Sanders was now starting to control the narrative of the campaign. But the situation back in Iowa wasn't out of the news yet. On February 5th, The Guardian reported that the Iowa Democratic Party altered one precinct's caucus results, shifting one delegate from Sanders to Clinton during the chaotic reporting process. The report said the change raised questions about the Iowa Democratic Party's management of the caucus. Again, this did not prove statewide vote manipulation, but it showed that precinct-level management and reporting was messy. On February 8th, the Clinton campaign decided to go stronger against Sanders. Mandy Grunwald emailed Clinton's campaign leadership, including Podesta, before the New Hampshire primary. She wrote that she and Jim Andrews, a Clinton political consultant, had gone through opposition research and had, quote, a couple of new possible negatives to test because, quote, most of the attacks haven't been working. The proposed attacks included themes like "you pay for socialism" and "free stuff for everyone," framing Sanders' agenda as expensive, unrealistic, and a tax-heavy socialist agenda. So, yes, the Clinton campaign started framing Sanders in that manner with their surrogates, like Claire McCaskill, pulling out the old hammer and sickle quotes. But the attacks weren't working, at least not in New Hampshire. The last poll from CNN and WMUR, conducted by the University of New Hampshire, showed that Sanders was on track to win 61% of the vote compared to 35% for Clinton. And the poll wasn't far off. Sanders won New Hampshire with 60.1% of the votes to Clinton's 37.7%. According to CNN's exit poll, Sanders won with every group of voters except for those over 65 years old and those making over $200,000 a year. Sanders won voters aged 18 to 14 with 74%, with Clinton only at 25%. Sanders also won first-time voters, which was 16% of the New Hampshire electorate, with 78% of new voters going to Sanders compared to only 21% for Clinton. As far as those who identified as Democrats, Sanders was slightly ahead, 52% to 48%, but dominated with those who identified as independents, 73% to 25% for Clinton. Finally, of those who considered themselves moderate, which was 27% of the electorate according to the exit poll, 59% voted for Sanders, with 39% voting for Clinton. Of those who were liberal, the numbers were nearly identical, with Sanders receiving 61% to 39% for Clinton. Sanders received more votes than any of the candidates on both primary ballots that night. Essentially, the New Hampshire primary blew the preconceived notion of the Democratic establishment that Sanders would only be able to win far-left progressive voters. He was winning with middle-class, white, male and female, college and non-college educated voters who identified as both moderates and conservatives. Even after Bernie had come extremely close in Iowa and soundly defeated Clinton in New Hampshire, the media continued to portray Hillary as the frontrunner. The reason for this is that the media used the superdelegate count to make Clinton's support look significantly higher than it was compared to the pledged delegate count. According to a 538 article published on February 12th, after Iowa and New Hampshire, Sanders was leading Clinton in pledged delegates, which came directly from caucuses and primaries, 36 to 32. But when it came to superdelegates, Hillary had 362 to Sanders's 8. Most media outlets combined these two numbers, which showed Hillary significantly in the lead. And yes, these numbers weren't wrong, but did the media use the combined numbers to shift the narrative towards Hillary as the main frontrunner? Comment down below if you have an opinion on that. On February 11th, the Congressional Black Caucus PAC endorsed Hillary Clinton. At the endorsement event, Representative John Lewis was asked about Bernie Sanders' civil rights activism. Lewis said that he had met Hillary Clinton during the civil rights era, but had not seen Sanders. His most quoted line was, quote, "I never saw him, I never met him," end quote. This resulted in the Sanders campaign releasing a picture of Sanders being carried away by police in Chicago at a protest in 1963 in support of civil rights. Interestingly, there are no photos of Hillary involved in the civil rights movement at this time, and it seems that her involvement at the earliest was after the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr., 5 years after the Sanders photos. But 2 days later, Lewis clarified a statement saying that he was only talking about his personal experience. On that same day, the next debate was held in Milwaukee. The debate covered campaign finance, race, criminal justice, immigration, foreign policy, Henry Kissinger, healthcare, and the scope of government. For Clinton, she focused on her breaking barriers and implying that it was time for a female president, while Sanders continued to go after Clinton regarding Wall Street and campaign finance. But the most interesting part of that debate was regarding Henry Kissinger, with Bernie saying this.
Where the Secretary and I have a very profound difference. In the last debate, I believe in her book, very good book, by the way, in her book and in this last debate, she talked about getting the approval or the support or the mentoring of Henry Kissinger. Now, I find it rather amazing because I happen to believe that Henry Kissinger was one of the most destructive secretaries of state in the modern history of this country. I am proud to say that Henry Kissinger is not my friend. I will not take advice from Henry Kissinger. And in fact, Kissinger's actions in Cambodia, when the United States bombed that country, overthrew Prince Sihanouk, created the instability for Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge to come in, who then butchered some 3 million innocent people, one of the worst genocides in the history of the world. So count me in as somebody who will not be listening to Henry Kissinger.
When Clinton talked about how Kissinger improved relations with China, Sanders hit yet again with this.
I find it, it's just a very different, historical perspective here. Kissinger was one of those people during the Vietnam era who talked about the domino theory. Not everybody remembers that. You do, I do. The domino theory. If Vietnam goes, China, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. That's what he talked about. The great threat of China. And then after the war, this is the guy who, in fact, yes, you're right, he opened up relations with China and now pushed various type of trade agreements resulting in American workers losing their jobs as corporations moved to China, the terrible authoritarian communist dictatorship he warned us about. Now he's urging American companies to shut down and move to China. Not my kind of guy.
Senator.
So the Sanders campaign was able to use Kissinger not only to attack Clinton on foreign policy, but economic policy as well. But when it came to economic policy, the National AFL-CIO did not endorse either Clinton or Sanders. I guess both sides could consider this a win, as the endorsement of either candidate could have been a fatal blow to their campaigns. But now the campaign shifted over to Nevada. Clinton and Sanders appeared separately at a Las Vegas town hall broadcast by MSNBC and Telemundo. The Las Vegas Review-Journal reported that both candidates were fighting hard for Nevada and that the town hall focused partly on issues affecting Latino voters. On that same day, ABC reported that some audience members booed Clinton when she criticized Sanders by saying that he was not really a Democrat until he joined the 2016 presidential campaign. This showed the risks of Clinton's anti-Sanders strategy. Attacking Sanders as not a real Democrat could energize party regulars, but it could also alienate voters who like Sanders's outside image. Clinton tried to use party identification as a weapon against Sanders, while Sanders supporters saw the party establishment itself as part of the problem. Clinton would go on to win the February 20th Nevada caucuses, with 52.6% to 47.3% for Sanders. Even though Clinton won, Nevada was the first state which had a much larger Hispanic electorate. In the CNN entrance poll of caucus goers, Bernie was doing better with Hispanic voters, winning 53% of Hispanic voters to Clinton's 45%. As for black voters, Hillary won 76% to Sanders's 22%. White voters were nearly evenly split, with 49% for Bernie and 47% for Hillary. Up until now, the Clinton campaign had painted Bernie's campaign as the angry white male campaign, pounding on the Bernie bro moniker. The only group of voters that Bernie had performed poorly with in Nevada were black voters, which would be the dominant force in the next primary in South Carolina. Even though South Carolina was always going to be a challenge for Sanders, Clinton had her moment as well. On January 28, 1996, Clinton was speaking in support of President Bill Clinton's crime policies after the 1994 crime bill era. She referred to some young people involved in gangs and crimes as super predators, saying that they had no conscience, no empathy, and that, quotes, "we have to bring them to heel." End quotes. Nearly 20 years later, on February 24, 2016, BLM activist Ashley Williams interrupted Clinton at a private fundraiser in Charleston, South Carolina, holding a sign that said, "We have to bring them to heel." Time reported that Williams paid $500 to attend the event and was removed by security. On February 25, 2016, Clinton said that she should not have used those words, saying, quote, "Looking back, I shouldn't have used those words, and I wouldn't use them today," end quote. On the same day that Clinton was confronted, Sanders released a TV ad contrasting his climate and fracking position with Clinton's. The Sanders campaign press release said that he blamed Clinton for taking campaign contributions from those who would profit from destroying the planet. With this, Sanders was opening up another front, which was those dissatisfied with the Democratic Party on climate change. He had outflanked Clinton with anti-war voters a few weeks earlier. Now he looked to be doing the same with environmental voters. 1 week after Clinton's encounter with Ashley Williams, Clinton won the South Carolina primary with 73.4% of the vote, with Bernie Sanders only winning 26%. Of those who voted in the primary, 61% were black voters who supported Hillary Clinton with 86%, according to CNN's exit poll, compared to 14% for Sanders. When it came to white voters, which were 35% of those voting, Clinton also won, but by a much smaller margin, 54% to 46%. One person who wasn't going to stay quiet any longer was Tulsi Gabbard. The day after the South Carolina primary, Gabbard resigned as vice chair of the DNC and immediately endorsed Bernie Sanders. Yes, she was fiercely opposed to the debate schedule, but she was also a strong supporter of Sanders when it came to foreign policy, saying that war and peace wasn't just another issue for her, but the most important issue for her. Still, many in the media spun it into the continued DNC narrative of fractures within the Democratic Party, particularly against Debbie Wasserman Schultz. The next set of primaries and caucuses were huge. March 1st saw Super Tuesday, which resulted in a huge delegate lead for Hillary. Super Tuesday was the decisive Clinton recovery moment. She won major southern states, including Alabama, Arkansas, Georgia, Tennessee, Texas, and Virginia, as well as Massachusetts. Sanders won Colorado, Minnesota, Oklahoma, and Vermont. Clinton's large wins in the South gave her a major pledged delegate advantage that Sanders struggled to overcome afterward. The next debate was held on March 6th in Flint, Michigan, with the environment and clean water being the main issues, which Flint was going through a major water crisis. During the debate, Sanders strongly opposed fracking, while Clinton supported it but with tighter restrictions and regulations. This helped Sanders with climate activists and reinforced Clinton's image as more cautious and technocratic. 1 day later, which was the day before the Michigan primary, Clinton had a huge lead in Michigan, with a Fox 2 Detroit Mitchell poll showing Hillary with 61% support in the state to Sanders at 34%. A few days earlier, Monmouth University released a poll in Michigan showing it closer, but Clinton was still winning 55% to 42%. A Marist poll showed Clinton winning 57% to 40% for Sanders. But in the end, it was Sanders who was victorious. Sanders won 49.7% of the vote to Clinton's 48.3%. And while Hillary was watching the returns from Detroit, expecting to have this thing in the bag, Bernie was all the way down in Miami campaigning for the upcoming primary in Florida. His campaign expected to lose badly. He wasn't even in Michigan. But the next set of primaries, known as the Super Tuesday 2 primaries on March 15th, were expected to be strong Clinton states. Clinton would go on to win Florida, North Carolina, and Ohio by convincing margins. Even though Sanders had a strong performance in Illinois and Missouri, Clinton was able to pull off the win in both of those states. This was a devastating blow to Sanders. Even though the pledged delegate counts were close, with Clinton winning 334 pledged delegates to Sanders' 294, it was another situation where the superdelegates gave Clinton the edge, with 84 superdelegates from those states going to Clinton, but only 6 going to Bernie Sanders. However, in the West, where Democratic voters are usually more progressive, especially on the environment, Sanders was expected to perform better. On March 22nd, Clinton won Arizona, while Sanders won in Idaho and Utah. 5 days later, Sanders swept the contests in Washington, Alaska, and Hawaii. Sanders would win 149 pledged delegates compared to Clinton's 91. But again, Clinton won 26 superdelegates compared to Sanders winning 6. Yes, Sanders could win pledged delegates, but superdelegates always made the wins somewhat bittersweet. In fact, the next primaries were a pure example of the superdelegate issue, which was starting to get more attention in the press and criticism from the Sanders campaign. In Wisconsin, which was expected to be close, Sanders won 56.6% of the vote, with Clinton winning 43.1%. But when it came to the total delegates, Sanders only won 2 more, 49 to 47. In the state of Wyoming, which was a closed caucus state, Sanders won with 55.7% of caucus support compared to 44.3% for Clinton. But because of superdelegates, Clinton won 11 delegates, with Sanders winning 7. A few days after the Wyoming caucuses, Sanders received his first endorsement in the U.S. Senate. That was from Jeff Merkley from Oregon. Another senator that was expected to endorse Sanders was Elizabeth Warren, but she continued to remain quiet throughout the primaries. The next debate was on April 14th in Brooklyn, New York, right before the New York primary. Now that Clinton was starting to pull away from Sanders, her argument shifted over to electability, while Sanders continued the same attacks against Clinton as he had at the beginning of the campaign. 5 days later, Clinton won the New York Democratic primary with 57.5% of the votes, and Sanders winning 41.6%. The New York win was crucial because both candidates had strong claims to the states, since Clinton was the state's former senator and Sanders was born in Brooklyn. 12 days later, on April 26, the Acela primaries were held, named that because the Amtrak train Acela ran through all the states that had a primary that day. Clinton won Pennsylvania, Maryland, Delaware, and Connecticut, while Sanders won Rhode Island. This was another major delegate blow to Sanders. After New York and the Acela primaries, Clinton's lead became very difficult to overcome. The race increasingly shifted from, can Sanders win the nomination through pledged delegates, to, can Sanders influence the platform, convention rules, and the future of the party? Even though Sanders' path to the nomination was looking difficult, he was still mathematically in it. And yes, whenever somebody says that something is mathematically possible, that usually indicates that it's over. In another primary that Clinton was expected to win, which was the Indiana primary on May 3rd, Sanders instead won with 52.5% of the votes. And while Clinton could have probably coasted from this point on, the campaign wanted to continue attacking Sanders. A DNC email chain from May 2016 showed DNC CFO Brad Marshall suggesting that someone could ask whether Sanders believed in God, with the apparent idea that this could hurt him in states such as Kentucky and West Virginia. Again, even though Sanders is still a candidate and Clinton hadn't secured the nomination yet, we have the DNC continuing to collaborate with the Clinton campaign. Sanders would go on to win West Virginia and lose Kentucky by only 0.5%. Even though Nevada already had their county conventions early in the primary season, the state convention was held on May 14th. The convention became chaotic after disputes over delegate credentials, rules, and Sanders delegates. The conflict grew out of Sanders supporters believing that the state party was unfairly limiting their delegate gains. The Nevada episode became one of the most emotionally important process fights of the late primary season and later fed DNC email exchanges about Sanders' campaign and supporters. Nevada became the clearest post-Iowa example of Sanders supporters believing party rules and party officials were being used against them, though there really wasn't any evidence of this. This is when we first start to hear the chants, "Bernie or bust." Jeff Weaver said that the Clinton campaign was trying to hijack the convention, with Debbie Wasserman Schultz calling him a damn liar in DNC emails. On June 5th, Clinton won the Puerto Rico primary and was now just 30 delegates short of the nomination. That would change the next day when a number of superdelegates endorsed Clinton, thus giving her enough delegates to be the presumptive Democratic nominee for president. Clinton would win the rest of the contest with the exception of the Montana primary and North Dakota's caucuses. On June 15th, Clinton and Sanders met as part of an effort to resolve the primary fight and move toward unity. Vanity Fair reported the meeting focused on negotiating terms that would let Sanders support Clinton while preserving leverage over progressive agenda items and party reforms. Less than a month later, Sanders endorsed Clinton in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, saying that Clinton had won the Democratic nominating process and that he would do everything he could to help defeat the Republican nominee. And with that, we've come to the end of today's video. Or have we? No, we haven't. On July 22nd, 1 week after Sanders endorsed Clinton, WikiLeaks released nearly 20,000 DNC emails just before the Democratic National Convention. ABC reported that the emails showed DNC officials growing agitated with Sanders and, at times, floating ideas to undermine his candidacy. Sanders supporters were pissed. Their argument had been that the DNC was not neutral, and the emails proved their point. 2 days later, Sanders again called for Debbie Wasserman Schultz to resign. And indeed, that same day, Wasserman Schultz resigned as DNC chairwoman. A few days later, on July 25th, the Democratic National Convention opened in Philadelphia. The email scandal overshadowed the first day, with Sanders supporters protesting inside and outside of the convention. Of course, the emails were the topic of conversation, with the protests focusing on the debate schedule, the unfair treatment overall during the NGP fan firewall issues, and a host of other things. The party that Sanders had tried to unite a week and a half earlier was now splitting at the seams. And regarding the platform, the Sanders campaign was allowed to get a lot of what it wanted in the platform and felt that submitting minority reports on extra things that they wanted wasn't really worth the hassle. The day that the convention opened, the FBI announced that it was investigating the DNC cyber intrusion. And even though the email showed that the deck was stacked against him from the beginning, Sanders addressed the convention and urged his supporters to back Clinton against Republican nominee Donald Trump. Many Sanders supporters still protested and booed during parts of the first day, reflecting unresolved anger after the DNC email leak. Sanders tried to move his movement towards party unity, but the convention floor showed that there was a large part of his base that remained unconvinced. The next day, the roll call vote gave Clinton the nomination, with Sanders moving to nominate Clinton by acclamation. Many of Sanders' supporters were saddened by this move and walked out of the convention. Hillary Clinton was now the official nominee of the Democratic Party for the 2016 presidential election. And yes, now we truly have come to the end of this video. Clinton would go on to lose to Donald Trump in the general election. Many Clinton supporters said that many of Sanders' supporters voted for Trump in the election. But the evidence regarding that just isn't true, which is something I talk about in this video here. If you would like to watch more about Hillary Clinton's husband winning the 1992 election, you can check out that video here. Thank you very much for joining me. Please subscribe to the channel and join my Patreon if you would like to help the channel further. See you next time, and bye for now.